Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Basketball Podcast here on the GSMC Podcast Network. This is your host, back again, Brice, to talk about all things basketball with you here today. Yes, sir, I am back once again. So, the NBA season has started. We have basketball. Hope you all enjoyed your holidays. Hope you enjoyed Christmas Day basketball. I sure did. Watched every game on Christmas Day. A lot of blowouts the entire day, which, happens. But still, it's basketball. It's great to have it back. Excited for it. You know what I'm saying? Everything of that sort. Like I said, I hope all of you had a good holiday week. We have another holiday coming up a new year coming up this week in New Year's. So that's another, big thing to celebrate with your friends and family. Didn't have a podcast last Thursday. Won't have a podcast again this Friday coming out for the holidays. So this will be your one GSMC basketball podcast this week. And then next week after the new year, we will be right back on schedule. You'll hear me twice a week as we get deeper into the NBA season. So very excited to break down everything that's going to happen around the NBA. So we're going to get into the show, and we're going to just talk about today the Clippers. After the Clippers and the Mavericks. We're going to talk about the Mavs destroying the Clippers first. Then we're going to talk about the Mavs in general. Then we're also going to talk about the Clippers, how they've looked in the first three games outside of the Mavericks game. We're going to talk about the Hawks. They look very impressive early, and my thoughts on them, maybe as maybe a better than expected team in the Eastern Conference. We're going to talk about the defending champion Lakers. We're going to talk about the Kentucky Wildcats in college basketball as they've continued to have this free fall that's shocking to everybody, currently at 1-6 on the schedule, and other NBA news and performances around the association. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But before I get into that, I just want to remind you guys, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_basketball, where you can keep up with us, updates, reviews, all that on any basketball highlights, games, whenever they happen, where they happen. GSMC Twitter, we're going to be talking about it. So it's GSMC_basketball. So, there you go, right there. But let's go ahead and jump right into it, like I said. So, the Mavericks basically pummeled the Clippers by 51 points. And by half, it was 77-27. That's crazy. Especially after how good the Clippers had looked in their first two games. But yes, Dallas Mavericks destroyed the LA Clippers. It's just a complete wash, 124-73. Kawhi Leonard didn't play in this game. He sat out this game. So it was just Paul George. Paul George in this game did not have a great game. Went 4-13 from the field, 15 points. Really, all his points really came from the free throw line. He had 7 of 8 on the free throw line. Only 3 players on the Clippers scored in double digits. Serge Ibaka and Zubac were the other players. Outside of that, everybody basically did not have a good day for the Clippers, but obviously told by the final score. The Dallas Mavericks, on the other hand, Josh Richardson had 21. Doncic had 24. Hardaway had 18. It was very even scoring all around. And honestly, I think what was most shocking was how they came off the gates. And, you could just tell the Mavericks were committed and the Clippers won. Listen, and the Mavericks they're not in a desperate situation, but they started the season 0-2. And so coming back in this game, didn't want to go down 0-3. Clippers 2-0 coming to the game. Clearly one team seemed like they wanted this game more than the other game. Was this a game that you maybe thought the Clippers took a game off? I don't think that was the case. I just think they didn't come out ready to play. Paul George already said he came out and took full responsibility for what happened in this game, as he should. Because like I said, this was not a good performance for them. And they needed to play. They need to obviously bounce back from this game. They played the Minnesota Timberwolves next without Karl-Anthony Towns, who's currently out with a wrist injury. So, and they're currently 2-0, so they can bounce back. And Dallas continues on. They play the Hornets, who actually had an upset over the Brooklyn Nets, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. So, I'm going to talk about the Mavericks and my outlook and view on the Mavericks. So the Mavericks are a team that they made some changes to the team. They signed some guys. They didn't really make anything big. Kristaps Porzingis is out till January. They're planning to get him back in January, so they won't be with their second star till then. I think a lot of people were coming out of that bubble from basically from a few months ago, are starting to say that they really do feel like the Clippers would have lost to the Dallas Mavericks if Kristaps Porzingis wasn't hurt. And so Dallas is the team that people feel like they have the top-end star. We know Luka Doncic in the big playoff moments is going to have his big games. Obviously, in these situations of playoffs, you need the supporting cast. They have a very efficient and effective offense. That's one of their strengths. It's just defensively, they've been let down a lot. That's why they lost a lot of leads during last year, because defensively, they could not hold down teams. So one of their, obviously, biggest improvements they want to make as a team this year is on the defensive end, because offensively, with Luka, and especially when Kristaps Porzingis comes back, they'll have the offensive firepower to score with anybody in the league. It's just they have to become a better defensive team. That's why some people look at the Dallas Mavericks and say they are a dark horse Western Conference team, because they really have the talent, some people feel like, in terms of top-end talent, to play with some of the best top-end talent in the Western Conference, like a Damian Lillard, like a LeBron James and AD, like a Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. And this game kind of showed that. Like I said, Kawhi didn't play for the Clippers. They lost by 50. I don't think that may have maybe made too much of a big difference, but, it definitely doesn't help their case. And so I think it's going to be big moving forward to see what happens, I think the Mavericks have the potential to be good, and they've been actively trying to look for a third star. They know we may need a third guy to really get over the top in the Western Conference, because they also, I'm sure they realize, listen, as good as Kristaps Porzingis is, we understand that he does get hurt. He is a bit injury prone, so it's going to be good to have that second reliable or third reliable guy they could go to. And we don't know if Dallas is still planning to make a move. I'm sure Dallas is going to keep an eye on things and see if maybe there's a move to be made, potentially, if there's a player that actually becomes available. But I think they're very comfortable with what they have. And like they said, they played a really good, tough Phoenix Suns team in game one. Lost in over. I believe they lost. They didn't lose in overtime, but they lost close in the last minutes. And then they lost to the defending champion Lakers, who really looked good in that game. So it's not like they lost to two teams that weren't good. They lost to two teams that are perennial. One's the defending champ, and one people think is going to make the playoffs this year. So in both of those games, they played tough. So I think overall, they'll be fine. We know Luka is the star. We know Luka is a guy who has shown to be one of the best offensive players in all of the NBA. Not really the best shooter yet in his career, but just a gifted offensive scorer. Some people got to understand there's a difference from shooting and scoring. Scoring just means you just have a game that just gets buckets. That's a score, regardless if it's through the 3 or the 2. And then you got shooters. Luka is not a shooter, but he's a scorer, and he's an elite scorer at that. And that's one thing you can say coming out of that draft class with Trae Young and Luka. They definitely are scorers. They both have a very efficient and effective offensive game. And, we'll have to see what happens moving forward with them, moving on up. But it was just a crazy situation to see the Clippers get manhandled like that from them quarter one and never really be able to bounce back. I think that's the most shocking thing. And like I said earlier, Paul George took responsibility. Paul George said, yeah, that's on me. That's on me. And listen, Paul George understands, especially the way he played the playoffs last year. If he has bad games, if he has games where he struggles to, or he has games where he struggles to score, or has a game where he misses a lot of shots, people are going to clown him because people feel like Paul George isn't as good as some people say he is. And so he understands that there's going to be pressure on him. And the fact that he played this game and this happened, this didn't really help him. So we're going to have to see. And then the Clippers, like I said, continue on with the Clippers outlook. Overall, in the last 3 games, the Clippers have looked good. You know, they look good against the Clippers. Against the Lakers. They seem like they really wanted that game. They seemed like that game was like a game where it's like, we want this game. They looked really good against Denver, a team that they always look good against. They just couldn't hold leads. And they did what they did here. They had a big lead, and they actually held it this time. Paul George had a really good game. You know, like I said, Kawhi got banged up in that game, but overall, he had a good game. And so the Clippers pretty much are the team that people are wondering, okay, they're the second best team in the West. I think everybody has established that. The question is, how big of a threat to the Lakers are they? Are they legitimate threats? You know, because you can beat a team in the regular season, and then people still know when it comes to the playoffs, you know, the other team in 5. And the other team in 4 games, a sweep. So are the Clippers a team that, when they go toe-to-toe with the Lakers, actually can beat the Lakers? I think that's going to be the big thing. Can he go toe-to-toe with the Lakers? And so, if he could do that, then they'll be good to go. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think the Clippers can compete with the Lakers. I would still take the Lakers in a 7-game series right now. But this is why we play a season, because we got to see how the Clippers develop. We have to see how their chemistry goes. We have to see how they play together. We got to see just how everything meshes with Ty Lue as the head coach. We got to see if there's even any other moves they end up making. Remember, they don't even have Marcus Morris right now. He's still not playing. So we'll have to see how everything kind of works out for them. And when we see that, then we can maybe give more of a definitive answer on, can they compete with the Lakers? Because that's the question everybody wants to know. And so we'll have to keep an eye out for it. We'll have to see. I think that the Clippers, are better than the Nuggets. Portland, we'll have to see, depending on how Portland goes. Better than Portland. Unless another team rises up the ranks and really shows out, that's going to be Clippers, Lakers, Western Conference Finals for me. But the only other team that I feel like may be able to beat the Clippers and potentially change that is the Dallas Mavericks. Because I'm sure if we get a healthy Dallas Mavericks team with a healthy Kristaps Porzingis and a healthy Luka and everybody's healthy, I think that's a 7-game series to Game 7, and I think it can go either way. You know, I think the key, we know, like I said, with Dallas, they just have to improve on the defensive end. If they can become a better defensive team, then they can win a game like that. They can win a series like that. If they still have their defensive struggles, then I think the Clippers, since we know they can be a very good defensive team and clamp down on teams, because we've seen it, I don't think that's going to go away. They're more of a team that you would want to trust at this point in the season in a playoff situation. But both teams have good outlooks, because they could be the two teams battling to fight against the Lakers when it's all said and done. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast, we're going to get into some Hawks talk. Hawks looking good in the first 2 games of the season. We're going to talk about that. Also talk about the defending champs and other NBA news. So stay tuned for that right here on the podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we discussed the demolishing of the Clippers as Mavs and Clippers played. Mavericks to beat the Clippers by 51 points. Huge blowout. Made history by having a 50 point lead at halftime, 77-27. It's crazy to see it. You know, Dallas looked very dominant, so we talked about the outlook on both teams, how both teams, you know, have a good outlook. Those two teams could be competing for who the second best team in the Western Conference at the end of the year, behind the Lakers. And maybe one of them could challenge the Lakers as well. So we'll have to see. Right now, you'd probably give it to the Clippers, as they did beat the Lakers on opening day. And at the same time, we've also always viewed them as the Clippers have always wanted to play the Lakers just for the reasoning to show that we are the top team in Los Angeles. But you can't sleep on the Dallas Mavericks either, and we have to keep an eye on them moving forward. But now I want to get into some Atlanta Hawks conversation. We don't talk about the Hawks that much. We may talk about them here and there, but we don't talk about them a lot. You know, a lot of national attention never really is given to the Hawks for obvious reasons. They have not been a good team for the last few years, so that's understandable. But this offseason, they made a commitment. And they said, hey, we want to be a playoff team this year. We want to be a very good team this year. You know, you have Trae Young, who looks like a young star, potential superstar player. You know, you got a lot of young talent on this team. But we know in the NBA, just having young talent is not going to get you anywhere. You have to have a good mixture of veterans. And so what Travis Slink did, he went out, got him veterans, got him Rajon Rondo, got them Danilo Gallinari, got Bogdanovic, you know, drafted a center in the top, got Clint Capella from last year, guys like that to help boost with these young players. And so far, in the first couple of games of the year, the Atlanta Hawks have looked really good. They came out really basically at one point in the game leading Chicago Bulls in the first game of the season by 40 points. Offensively, they look head and shoulders different than they did last year. Remember, I pay attention to the Hawks. They're my team. So, you know, I'm someone who knows the weaknesses and strengths of that team. Last year, the Atlanta Hawks, outside of Trae Young and John Collins, had no offense. Legitimately, because Cam Reddish was struggling. Kevin Huerter was hurt. They really just had no one else who could get ball and basket. It was a struggle offensively if one of them was hurt or suspended. This year is completely different. And Trae's still averaging 30 in each game. He scored 30 plus in each game, but he scored much more efficient. And I think that's Trae's next step as a scorer, is to become now an efficient scorer. But we'll get more into Trae in a minute. But as a team, now they know, hey, outside of John Collins, outside of Trae Young, Cam Reddish looks good his second year. He can score. DeAndre Hunter, the last year's first round pick, looks better. Danilo Gallinari, we know he's one of the best 3-point shooters in the game. He can score. Bogdanovic, he's a good shooter. He can score. You know what I'm saying? They have guys who can put up points. And so now they've gotten much more deeper on the offensive end of the ball. So now they can score. And then another big issue that was plaguing them, and this is what a lot of young teams go through, is defense. They struggle on the defensive end of the ball. Usually, you know, offensive is like the fun part. It's the fun part. You can show off, make spectacular plays. That's why you'll see young players put more into their offensive game early. But this team, if they really wanted to make that next step, they had to play defense. And that was another reason why they added guys like a Clint Capella, like a Rajon Rondo. You know, they drafted, like I said, the guy this year from USC, a defensive center. You know, got Chris Dunn. All these additions they've made because they wanted to improve both sides of the ball. They wanted to have their young players and veteran leadership, and they wanted to basically make the playoffs because their goal is just to make the playoffs. And if they go any further than that, then that's great. But their goal is to become a better team this year and develop and be a playoff team in the Eastern Conference. And I think one thing that this team reminds me of is they kind of remind me of the Lakers in a way, not in terms of, oh, yeah, they have two great top 5 players or anything like that. That's not what I mean. But what I mean is in the way they're constructed. Remember the Lakers last year? One of the advantages they had is that they could play multiple ways. They could play small because of AD. They could play big. So, because they had bigs like Dwight and JaVale. They could play any type of style they needed to play to win because they had the guys. Because usually a lot of teams can only play a certain way. Usually, like Houston, small ball. We can only play small. We can only play fast pace. That's when we're at our best shooting. We play a certain style. That's our style. Or if you're the 76ers, you have Ben Simmons who's 6'10", Embiid 7 foot, Al Horford 6'10". But the problem is they couldn't play small. Embiid, yeah, he could dominate in a small ball lineup, but they really couldn't play small because Simmons can't shoot. So you can still collapse on Embiid. And I think the Atlanta Hawks, the way they're constructed, they can play big with Clint Capella, with a Bruno. Maybe these guys maybe you never heard of, but I'm just saying, they can play big. They can play small with Danilo Gallinari, Cam Reddish, DeAndre Hunter, John Collins. They can play different ways, and so now it's like, depending on the team they play, they can say, okay, with the amount of deep, because I can legitimately sit here and tell you the Hawks are 15 deep. I can legitimately sit there and tell you that. At the end of their bench are the other two rookies they drafted outside of their first round pick. Probably all three of the rookies once the other one gets back. But they are legitimately a 10 deep, 12 deep team. And so they can play many different ways and many different styles. And I think that may be something you may start to see teams try to do. Because remember, especially in a year where you have a condensed 72-game schedule, and one of the biggest things you need is depth on a team because of the fact that you're going to have to play many games, and you're going to have injuries, and you're going to have to rest players. You want to make sure you're deep. And I think some teams may have taken that strategy from the Lakers and said, okay, let's be able to play multiple ways. Let's be able to play different types of ways. Let's not be a one-trick pony kind of team. Because if you do become a one-trick pony kind of team, you become predictable. It's like if your style of play is not working that night, you don't have that other style of play. Where if you have a very flexible and fluent roster, you can be able to do something like that. And I think that's going to be the thing that's going to be big for them moving forward. So, like I said, I'm not sitting here making any crazy predictions like the Hawks are going to make it to the finals or anything like that. But the Hawks are definitely a team to me who look much more improved. They have improved their roster tremendously. I think Lloyd Pierce is going to really show people how good of a coach he is this year. And I also believe that, listen, you can sit here and say they played the Bulls. The Bulls at this point may look like a team like, okay, they may not even make the playoffs. Okay, fine. I'll let you have that. The Memphis Grizzlies didn't make the playoffs last year, but they were basically, you can maybe say if the season never ended, would have made the playoffs. In terms of ended because of COVID. And they have a young superstar in John Morant. And they beat them. They play Detroit. Again, maybe a team that's not that impressive to you. And then they play the Brooklyn Nets back-to-back. So that's going to be the games right there early in the season to tell us truly where the Hawks are as a team. As the Nets, now they did lose again to the Charlotte Hornets, which shocked a lot of people. So, maybe it can tell you. Because sometimes, like I said, not everybody takes the regular season that serious. You don't know if somebody's up for a team or not. Maybe that's why the Nets didn't win this game. But, those games will kind of tell us where the Hawks are right now and how serious maybe we should start to take them as a legitimate playoff team. And then I want to switch over to the defending champ Los Angeles Lakers as they got their first win and victory of the year on Christmas Day. Yes, sir. The Lakers beat the Dallas Mavericks. Looked really good in that game. The Lakers came out with a different energy. In the Clippers game, when I watched that game, they kind of came out almost just okay, we'll play. Yeah, that's fine. They didn't come out very focused. I didn't see a lot of energy from LeBron, a lot of energy from AD. It felt like the Clippers were always the more aggressive and assertive team that entire night. It felt like the Lakers were just okay, we're playing because we're obligated to play. We're playing because it's opening day. But I didn't really see a sense of urgency. I didn't really see a sense of we are trying to really play hard tonight and win. And you would think against a team like the Clippers, you would get up for that game. But I don't feel like the Lakers really got up for that game. But in this game against the Dallas Mavericks, it seemed like LeBron was much more aggressive. Much, much, much more aggressive. He seemed way more involved. We saw him in all aspects of the game. Passing, scoring, doing it all, really. AD seemed more invested, even though he got a little banged up in the game. He looked much better to me. And so that was really big for me to see him come out there and play better. Because, like I said, we don't some people think the Lakers may finish as like a 4th or 3rd seed in the Western Conference because they really think this may be one of those years where LeBron may only play 60 games, 58 games. And so they may not be that great, from a perspective in terms of record, even though we know realistically they're one of the best teams. And so we have to keep that in mind. Because like I said, Anthony Davis won't play in their next game against Minnesota. So we'll see how that looks. I'm sure LeBron will play, but we'll see how many minutes. I expect LeBron. There's a chance I think LeBron can average under 30 minutes a game this year too. Like I said, trying to stay fresh for the playoffs. So, it will be interesting to see. I think the Lakers last year during the regular season wanted to prove something. That's why they played hard. That's why the number 1 seed. This year, they're defending champs with a condensed schedule and 2 players that they want to make sure are good. We'll see how the Lakers play this season. I feel like there's going to be stretches where they're going to be like, okay, let's try to gear it up. And there's going to be moments and stretches where they're just like, all right, let's relax a little bit. If we're able to get through this stretch and win games, great. If not, that's okay too. It's like I said, when Cleveland made it to the finals those years and LeBron with Kyrie in them, they maybe didn't finish the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. But you knew that they were the best team in the Eastern Conference because they knew realistically we're not going to go all out to make sure we get the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. In the Eastern Conference. We're going to make sure we're healthy and make sure we're ready to play by the playoffs, but we're not going to exert that type of energy that we did exert, as we did last year. And like I said, that's another reason why they added the depth they added for that, so they could still be a good team on the floor and still be able to win games. Because remember, one of their issues last year is if LeBron didn't play, they struggled. If LeBron sat out, they struggled. So if they wanted to take that same approach with last year's team, they would definitely maybe not be the number 1 seed because they wouldn't be able to play without LeBron James and AD to that extent. Where now this year, they may feel they feel a lot more confident in saying, okay, LeBron, you want to take a game off, want to take a back-to-back off, that's fine. AD, you feeling a little banged up, that's fine. Take a game off. We're still confident we could go out with the guys we have, compete, and win. And I think that's always a great luxury to have. That's why it's important to have depth in this league for that particular reason. You want to always feel like, hey, we got plenty of depth to still be good. We have plenty of depth to still be a very competitive team. And be just as good as any team, even without LeBron or AD on the floor, or both, because there's gonna be games where probably both don't play. So we'll have to see. We'll have to definitely see what happens. And I think it's very exciting to look at in that situation if you're a Laker fan. So we'll have to keep an eye on them throughout this season. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're actually going to get into some quick college basketball news and talk about the Kentucky Wildcats. As that's been one of the biggest stories in college basketball is what happened to Kentucky. 1-6, another loss. John Calipari made some interesting comments. We'll discuss that. Here we're also going to talk about Golden State. They haven't looked good in their first few games. We're going to talk about how they've looked, what's going on, etc., and other NBA news. So stay tuned for that right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we talked about the Atlanta Hawks, how they looked in their first 2 games, how they look as a team to me, how they could definitely be a legitimate playoff team this year in the Eastern Conference, the way they look with Trae Young, continuing to look great, the depth they've added to this roster, the veteran leadership, and the improvement on both sides of the court, I think gives them a lot of chance and the possibility to be really good this year and maybe turn some heads in the NBA league that maybe some people would have been turned this year by the Atlanta Hawks. So we talked about that. We also talked about the defending champ Lakers bouncing back from their opening night loss to the Clippers, playing with much more energy, much more urgency. Looked really good, was able to handle the Mavericks pretty much from start to finish. So they look really good, and etc. But before we get into our next segment, I'd like to guys remind you, whatever platform you're listening to GSMC Basketball Podcast on, don't forget to leave a review or subscribe. We definitely appreciate that here at the GSMC Podcast Network. So definitely would not mind you going out of your way to leave that for us because we definitely appreciate it. Obviously, anything I can be to be a better host, definitely do that. So don't forget to subscribe and review today. So let's go ahead, dive into some more news. So we're going to go switch it to some college basketball. So the Kentucky Wildcats, considered a blue chip program. John Calipari, the king of one and dones, usually is able to get he'll get 5 5-star recruits and then get another 5 the next year because all the 5-star recruits be gone and they come back. But eventually, it's going to catch up to you. Eventually, 5-star recruits are not always going to want to come in waves. So do you get some 4 stars, maybe some 3 stars? And now the Kentucky this year, a traditional power in the NCAA, have started off the season 1-6. They've had some issues. They've had to send one of their players home based off some issues after the North Carolina game. One of their better players. And John Calipari, after losing again the other night to Louisville, their rival, made comments saying, I made a bad schedule. And those are very interesting comments to hear a coach make. To sit here and say, I should have never made the schedule that I made. That he's blaming his scheduling as the reason. You know? He says in his quote, this is the stupidest schedule he's ever put together. And so his reasoning behind that was usually, I guess he says, you want to build a schedule that builds confidence. That's one reason why some teams that have a tremendous amount of talent or always have great talent always kind of schedules cupcakes early because, even though it's a lesser team, it builds confidence. It makes you feel better about your game. Like, okay, yeah, I can do this, I can do that. And he basically feels like he built a schedule that was tougher early, so his players were never able to develop the confidence, and now you're losing, and now their confidence is dropping. And now that's why you're seeing all these issues on the team, certain players on Kentucky struggling to get their game. Because he was like this, and I quote, you have to play games you can win to build confidence. This was the stupidest schedule I've ever put together, and I'd like to smack myself in the mouth. Listen, we should have played up front. We should have played games up front that we had a chance to win. 4 or 5 of them. Then play 4 or 5 of the others. Not 8 hard games. We still have Texas left, who is like 10th in the country. Think about it. Now, am I doing that to me or to these kids? It was to these kids. It was just dumb. Now, the reason why this is a horrible excuse is that, listen, you are the Kentucky Wildcats. Basketball-wise, you are considered a power within college basketball. You recruit some of the best players to come play at your university. We could go down the list of players they've had. Julius Randle, John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, Quickly, who was just drafted. You know, they have had a lot of guys play at Kentucky and go to the league. De'Aaron Fox, another example. And to sit here and say, I should have maybe made the schedule easier for the kids to be more confident, just doesn't make sense. The biggest issues through Kentucky's season has been their offense. They have struggled on the offensive end of the ball. They struggle to score. And when you struggle to score, that's usually because remember, the college game can since everybody runs a zone defense, it feels like we know the college game could sometimes not be the highest scoring games in the world. And then if you actually have a hard time putting the ball in the basket, that makes things even worse. And so this is not a good excuse if you're John Calipari. And listen, he's had his issues with the fans. Listen, I've talked to Kentucky fans over the years, and it's like, yeah, we're winning. It's great. He's great. But John Calipari has never been loved, it feels like, by the fans truly, like other coaches, like Coach K and Roy Williams and those coaches. It feels like he came here, he gets recruits there, it's just a factory. And that's really all it is. That's why when the Kentucky struggles, fans are much more in Kentucky willing to say, all right, I'm okay with letting John Calipari go. Because if you think about this Kentucky team, you're just thinking to yourself, you played Georgia Tech, you played Richmond. It's not like you're playing every ranked team in the country. And yet you're losing to these guys. You lost to Louisville, who some people wonder how good they're going to be this year, especially with no Rick Pitino. And so they have to, really figure out who they are. Because at this rate, they may not even make the tournament unless they turn things around quickly. And now it's like you have all this talent, you don't make the tournament, you have to point some eyes. Because remember, usually they're a one-and-done factory. Recruits are not going to want to play there. Because let's listen, Kentucky may be a blue-chip program, and they can still get top recruits. I'm not saying they can't. But if you sit here and think about it, if you're a recruit watching what's going on in Kentucky, you may sit here and say, I don't know if I want to play there next year. Because sometimes there's a difference between having a bad year and then now you're having a bad year with a lot of issues around it. And so all that is a question that has to be asked. And we'll have to see how everything works out. Really, we do. So we're going to see how Kentucky bounces back. It's just been big news to a lot of people because of the fact that Kentucky it was kind of like North Carolina last year, who had a really down year. Just like, wow, what happened to you guys? Why is there so much? Why are y'all struggling so much? So we're going to have to see what happens with them. But then next, we're going to get into the Golden State Warriors. They started off the season 0-2. As I am recording this, they are currently trailing the Chicago Bulls 122-117 with 3 minutes left to go in the fourth quarter. I will give a final update on that game to give you an official win-loss. But if they lose this game, they'll start the season 0-3. They have not looked good in the first 2 games. Blown out by Brooklyn. Blown out by Milwaukee. And now people are asking, does this mean? Now, yes, Draymond Green hasn't been playing. But I don't think Draymond Green would have completely sat here and changed the reflection of these games. And people are asking, is Klay Thompson the most important Warrior now? Because it looks like the way things are looking right now, Golden State is going to be a bad team again this year. Because if you honestly sit here and think about it, with Klay getting hurt, we thought, when Clay gets back, there'll be a top team. Steph and Clay, Draymond, Wiseman. Remember, there wouldn't have been any, Oubre if Clay was healthy. Wiggins. And now you lose Clay. Oubre has not made a single, I believe tonight he did, but before the Bulls game, did not make a single shot that was not a dunk. He was 0 of 11. He was struggling. Wiggins is just, people are looking at Wiggins. I see it every time when Wiggins play, they're just like, he's just not it. He's just not it. He is not that guy. Everybody thinks he has this potential to break out because they see some good things from him, but he just isn't that guy. And now your team is different because you have two guys who can't shoot that well. And what is the Warriors been? A 3-point shooting team. You lose one of the best shooters in all of the NBA to an Achilles. And now you get a guy who's struggling to shoot and Andrew Wiggins who can't shoot. And literally, legitimately, the only person who can shoot on the floor is Steph Curry. And Wiseman can make one every day. He's been a bright spot. He's played well for them as well. Wiseman has played well as a rookie for Golden State. But it's not enough. And one thing I always did question about Golden State anyway before this year was their depth. I still felt like they don't have the bench. They don't have a great bench to me. Where it put a lot of pressure on a Clay and a Steph and that starting unit with Wiseman and Wiggins to score enough points and the bench give them just a little bit, to play well. They just lost Marquise Chris for the rest of the year. So they lost somebody off that anyway. And so I honestly, I don't feel like this Warriors team is any better than last year's team. It's basically last year's team. Except if Steph stays healthy, they may win a couple more games. I don't think Oubre and Wiggins are going to change the outcome that dramatically. Listen, I don't think they're going to be as bad record-wise as they were last year. But I don't think they're going to be a playoff team either. I think they're going to miss the playoffs by a good number of games. I don't think they're even going to be in that 7, 8 to 10 range. So that should tell you where I'm kind of looking at Golden State right now. They don't look good right now. And the biggest thing you've noticed is that where are they going to get their offense from? Because remember, Steph has played well, but he hasn't had any big 40-point games. He's had 20. He's playing well, but he's not playing at the level he has to play at for them to win. But, you have to understand, Steph's coming back from injury, trying to get himself back. You don't know if Steve Kerr said, you know what? Hey, Steph, if you want to have your big nights, great. But he has to do better. You know what I'm saying? And it just looks like it's going to be another down year for the Warriors. So they're going to have to maybe wait one more year before they really can start actually being a legitimate team in the NBA, unless they make a big move at the deadline. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into some more NBA basketball news here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast, so stay tuned.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed many different topics. Discussed the Kentucky Wildcats, how they're struggling. 1-6 so far. John Calipari struggling, making horrible excuses for why the team's not doing well, saying he made a dumb schedule because he should have took technically easier teams. John Calipari, you have 5-star recruits. Win games. If you don't, you're failing. and you deserve to be fired. Simple as that. Also, we discussed the Golden State Warriors, and just simply, the Warriors just may not be that good anymore. They just may not be they're just not a good, I don't see them, after seeing the first few games, I don't see them being any better than what they were before last year. Except they may win a couple more games more, but I don't see anything changing in terms of records dramatically, them being a borderline playoff team, etc., etc. So, but I do have an update. On their game over the Bulls. They actually won their game 129-128 on a game-winning 3 by Damian Lee. So the Warriors are now 1-2 after a game-winning bucket. So they're only a game away from 500, but that's obviously a good to get their first win of the year, and etc. But let's go ahead and jump into the news. So the Nets were upset today by the Charlotte Hornets in a surprising upset. Remember, Charlotte just the day before had a very close matchup, a close game against the Thunder where they lost on a game-winning shot by Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And now they came back and beat Brooklyn Nets in the 104-106 game. Gordon Hayward had a big game for the Hornets with 28, especially some clutch buckets down the stretch. Devontae Graham had 13, P.J. Washington had 14, Terry Rozier had 19, Bridges had 10, Biyombo had 12. Very even scoring. LaMelo Ball only had 6 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists in the game, but went 2 of 3 from 3. On the Nets side, Kevin Durant had 29 points on 9 of 15 shooting, 5 of 7 from the three-point line. Kyrie had 25. But in this game, they really just didn't get enough. Their third leading scorer had 13, and Joe Harris. Chris LeVert gave them 10. Dinwiddie gave them 5. That's not going to get it done. So, big win for the Hornets. Getting their first win of the season. Could easily be 2-1 right now. But, again, got a very good quality win. And we'll see. So, I mean, listen. This is prone to happen during the regular season, where you'll see teams like this beat the nut, like we've seen it all the time. Maybe the Nets just didn't get up that high for the game. Maybe they looked at it and said, "Oh, we're playing the Charlotte Hornets. Okay, let's go out here and play our best basketball tonight, guys." I mean, I'm just being honest. They may have sat there and said that, like, okay, I guess we'll play them, and then they came into the game. It's like, oh snap, we're actually gonna lose this game. Okay, hold up a second, and then it was just too late to turn it on. So I'm sure the Nets are trying to get back from this game. Speaking of the Nets, they actually have a back-to-back after the Hornets game, and people are wondering if the Nets are going to let Kevin Durant play. Kevin Durant wants to play in the back-to-back, so we'll see if the Nets allow him to. Sometimes come back from injuries. You know how teams like to, usually back-to-backs, they're like, okay, we don't want to push him too much. Still coming back from an injury, so let's not play him in back-to-backs. Let's give our veteran star players rest. But Kevin Durant said he wants to play in the back-to-back, so we'll see if they'll let him. Like I said, big win for the Hornets. Gordon Hayward, even, a lot of people question the Hornets for giving Gordon Hayward that kind of deal. Like, why would you do that? He's not a player who's going to change your team. The Hornets have a lot of young talent. And they have a lot of good players. And Gordon Hayward isn't a guy that you think would push him over the top or anything of that sort. But you definitely have seen these last few games, the Hornets are definitely much more competitive. And look like a very tough out for a lot of them. And they could be a team battling for that playoff spot in that 7-10 tournament. I think they could beat the 10th or 9th best team. So definitely can't rule that out. Definitely have to keep that under consideration. And we'll have to see what happens moving forward with that. But in other news in the NBA, John Morant, Mr. Morant, says that he feels like that the NBA, the refs of the NBA, to be exact, are not giving him enough respect with calls. It's something that sometimes you'll hear a player say, I don't feel like I'm getting the calls that I deserve to be getting. And he says he's fed up with the lack of respect from referees, especially after the loss they had to the Atlanta Hawks. And this has to do with the fact that in the Hawks game, he was teed up for them missing a call. And he said after about why he got teed up, when someone is fed up, that's what happens. And so, it kind of brings up a question. There's always been that question. Do superstars get calls? Do referees kind of sit here and say, okay, this is so-and-so, so if this happens, we'll go ahead and give them the call? Because, this is something that you've heard for a long time. Certain players get calls. We've heard of the whole you have to officiate every player differently. Because think about Shaq. He's so big and strong. They said, and like LeBron as well, you don't know if, when they get contact, is it affecting them? Because, clearly a ref looks at a foul and says, is this type of, action affecting the player when shooting or trying to make a basketball play? And so Shaq was so big and so powerful, when people would smack him, referees would know really, okay, is he actually getting affected, or is he just powering right through it like it's nothing? Now, we can sit here and make the argument they should call it anyway, but that happens. And then you'll know some guys, you'll say, okay, you're young, we're not going to give you those calls right away. If you look at his counterpart from the Hawks game, Trae Young, he's one of the best free throw shooters in the league. He's one of the best at getting up the line. I say he's learned a lot from James Harden. He does a lot of James Harden tactics to get fouled. When Trae Young gets you behind him, he always stops and pulls up, and you always end up fouling him. He usually gets calls. And John Morant probably feels like, he's a guy who, remember, John Morant's not a shooter. So a lot of his shots he's taking are in the paint. He's driving to the paint, trying to make plays. And so he's going into the teeth of the defense. And so he probably feels like, hey, I'm taking a lot of contact and I'm not getting calls. So I understand why he maybe feels like with that type of playing style, why am I not getting the call? And we could sit here and say, well, he's a young guy. Is he not getting calls because he's a young guy? We don't know. But, he feels like, hey, I'm getting fouled and they're not giving me the calls. They're not giving me the respect. And so we'll have to see if maybe that continues. Listen, people say LeBron complains. Even in his 17th year, every time he gets a bit of contact, we see LeBron, waving his arms, like, whoa, 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 he fouled me, you know what I'm saying? But LeBron never gets teed up, surprisingly. But he always complains, right? So I'm sitting here and I'm like, hey, John Morant, best advice I can give you, sir, just keep balling, play through contact. Because sometimes, you got some players who are so concerned with getting a call, they don't really play through contact. They kind of just hope the referee bails them out. But just play through contact, do what you got to do, and then the calls are going to come when you need the calls to come. You might have a gripe if someone's punching you and they're not calling it. Then it's just like, okay, what's going on here? But overall, I think he'll be good to go. He's got to keep playing his game and don't let it distract him too much, and he'll be fine at the end of the day. And the last thing I want to get into, James Harden rumors. Obviously, James Harden came off that big overtime game against the Portland Trail Blazers. First game Houston had this year and James Harden has had this year. Big game for James Harden. Impressive. And so, the question is, what's the status update when it comes to the trade rumors? Apparently, right now, Houston feels like the offers that have been presented to them as recently are not good offers. They feel like the offers that they have been receiving are not good enough. And so, right now, overall, they feel as if, listen, we are not trading James Harden unless we get maximum value that we feel like we deserve for him. And so they're going to probably hang on to James Harden a little bit longer. Listen, we don't know when it'll get there. I'm sure there's going to be constant updates. Every week I said there's going to be updates on the James Harden situation. And it has to be expected. But you know they're making sure we're going to get what we want from this. And right now, the offers that have been presented to them have just not looked good to them. They've sat here and just been like, listen, we need better offers if y'all really want James Harden. So that clearly means they're not giving up James Harden anytime soon. Of course, you've done everything you can as Houston. Like I said, if James Harden's still going out there when he plays and dropping 40, it's not like it's going to affect his performance. Now, yes, we are aware of him getting into it with his teammates, creating some issues within the team, potentially, with some of his behavior of recently. But on the court, when those games start, he is still James Harden. He is still balling. He's still dropping 40. And remember, this is still all without Boogie and John Wall, who are currently not able to play because of COVID restrictions. So we still have yet to see this Houston team at full strength. And some people still maybe wonder if they get it full strength, and then James Harden's in there and they play really well and they look really good, is there even the slightest possibility that James Harden might rescind his trade demands and stay with Houston? We don't know. Especially with everything that's happened, maybe the damage is unfixable at this point. But it's a question that has to be asked. So we'll have to keep an eye on the situation. We'll have to keep an eye on what happens. And we're going to have to just hope for the best overall in this situation. So, like I said, we're gonna see what happens. Hope for the best. And we'll see if maybe a team steps up and gives Houston truly what they want. Because we know when that day comes, it's going to be huge NBA news if James Harden gets traded. But that's all the time we have here for this podcast. Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for letting me be part of your day. Don't forget to listen to our other amazing podcasts here at the GSMC Podcast Network. This is your host, Brice, signing out, saying have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.